cloud and assume that somebody later.
It's the one that Ingolf gave me.
That's the one I was given from the school.
Okay, so they will arrive on somebody's computer and they'll forward it to Bradford in the end. Okay, great. Bradford, welcome. The trouble is I can't make eye contact with you.
That's fine.
Why don't you move closer, because it's probably more important that Dr. Faber sees you.
I'm fine, so this is working.
I promise that he's tired of seeing me. So I'll push this out of the way. We're now recording. Can you turn on your record as well, so we have a second copy? Great. Well, I'm happy that we're together. This is the first meeting of your committee, and we've had the chance to talk about your PACE in some detail. The major function of this meeting is for the committee to either say, you may move forward and prepare a full dissertation proposal, or no, stop, red light. Please go back and make some fundamental changes, and then at that point we'll meet with you a second time and then authorize you to write the full proposal. After deliberation, we all feel that we'd like you to go ahead and write the full proposal based on this précis. And précis basically just means a pre-proposal, right? An outline of what you would like to propose as your topic. And based on the pre-proposal, all of us would like you to go ahead. So it's our job now is to share in as much detail as possible what we would like to see in the full proposal, where things seem unclear, where something is missing, where maybe you're not fully aware of a question, where we want you to add or subtract from your current intentions. And this is binding. So this is the committee telling you, when we see the proposal, we're going to hold it to the standards of this conversation. This is important enough that I'm going to ask you to transcribe each of the major points and meet with me just so that we can go over what Dr. Belfort and Dr. Faber have said, so that you and I are accountable to their guidelines as we work on the proposal. Okay? So Dr. Faber will go first, and then Dr. Belfort. Mostly they'll be sharing things they want to see, but there may be a few questions of clarification that they'll want to ask you. And then I'll have something to say to you. Very well. Okay? Dr. Faber.
Yes, Brett, I like your proposal. So basically I want to say I'm fine with it. You don't have to be concerned in any profound sense. But I would kind of contest it or whatever. So what I'm gonna do is like I probably give you like two kind of series of comments and maybe ask you one or two questions that could also be answered later, but you could say something about them if you want to at this point. So one is I think what you want to do is to talk in certain ways about, in the end, of the love of God as a radically contingent movement of divine action towards the world, and maybe also backwards towards God. And what I don't see yet is how the elements that with which you build up this kind of thesis are coming together in the end. So all the ways you go through evolutionary theory and that you build up with Gould and maybe the conversation going on with Conway Morris and so on and all that, and then you go on to Polkinghorne and to Philip Clayton, and then you go on to Ord and so on, right? So this progression of ideas that become, I understand, from more scientific to more theological, right? But also like how they build up layers of your understanding of that contingency, or God's love is contingency, or God's action as contingency, and what implications that would have for an understanding of the God-world relationship and so on, right? Or for the development of a theological understanding of evolution, these elements. I would like to see more about the progression of thought. Maybe there are layers, maybe they are kind of highlighting one another's elements in some way, or maybe they are overcoming some weaknesses of the other, or maybe they are just adding together to a synthesis. I want to see more about that relationship, about the different kind of chapters that you present to us. Okay, so that's the one element. The other one, I was wondering is about why you have to compare Ort with my work in the end. So I'm not sure about that. I mean, if I don't even see, like, in the proposal what the meaning of it would be, except, I mean, I understand basically that you want to compare him with someone else. But so if you, so I'm not against it, but I don't yet see what that implies, and whether it implies that I have to accept an interpretation of myself, right, in your dissertation in order to sign off for it. So I'm not sure about how Philip is handling this with his own part of it, right?
I'll decide if the interpretation is correct.
Anyway, so it plays that. So I don't want to be in your shoes, Philip, like being part of that whole.
No, I don't want to be in those shoes.
But so as far as it goes, let me say that I have worked later to the three works that you mentioned on the question of contingency and evolution relationship to religion. So if, I think I would, if I were you and you want to do this before you kind of make up your mind, I would look at the Garden of Reality, especially. I mean, there are passages on multiplicity and cosmology and evolution in there you can find easily, at least with the index if you want to be quick. But there's a specific passage at the end in the epilogue, I think it's section 4, where I'm making a case for the contingency of truth that I'm talking about in this book, that kind of is cosmologically relating to what you're doing. So I would kind of look at that if you want to know what my position would be on it in relationship. And then there will be a whole chapter, it's chapter 13 of the new book, The Ocean of God, coming out in June, that you might have a look before you go ahead and formulate your opinion on it, since it's developing in myself too, as I go on to write. So given the relationship to the theological question of the love of God, as contingent to the positions that you formulate with science and philosophy, I would like to ask you like a few things besides these two kind of comment areas, where I would ask you to develop that or explain that further for your final proposal. One would be, like, I am not totally sure how you decide or whether you in fact in the end decide to go with Gould instead of Conway Morris. So Conway Morris talking about convergencies in evolutionary processes, which means that certain repetitions on Earth or somewhere else in the cosmos would be working for him. And certain areas of a potential space, a space of potential realizations would kind of converge, would be an expression of convergence over others where there's nothing happening. So certain things will never happen, basically, although they're possible, and others are kind of trying to be realized. That's kind of his position, which seems to have in the background some kind of idea of purposefulness. In Gould, that seems to be totally gone, in a sense, right? And you mentioned somehow that he is therefore more theistically oriented. I mean, Conway Morris is over Gould, and Gould might make even that as an argument against any theism, this kind of contingency that he's talking about, the non-repetitiveness of evolution, right? So I wonder how you, it's one of the questions, how you're gonna decide between them. Are you gonna decide because you like the idea, one idea more than the other? You go backwards from the theological thinking and say, I pick this one over the other as something, or maybe you don't pick it, or, you know. So here's the question, or the area of questions. How do you decide between Gould and Conway Morris, let's say?
Very well. I understand your question. I, of course, come from a biological background, and I worked in biology as well. And I've been drawn for decades now to the position of Stephen Jay Gould. So if I were to come down on one side, it would be with Gould. And that's why I emphasize the contingentist understanding of divine action. Not so much contingency per se, but a contingentist understanding, meaning that someone who posits the everywhere pervasive contingency in nature. And I'm looking to co-opt that and employ it in a theological manner and sort of adopt it in a sense and transform it also in another sense. Does that make sense to you there, sir?
No, so yeah, it's kind of it's basically your interest where you fall down. You don't have a rational argument in the end, or you might have a theological argument that you want to build up, and therefore you choose that over the other. You're just more interested in the one over the other. Like I wonder, for instance, regarding certain questions, for instance, how is there some kind of purposefulness still restored or ingrained, or does it remain in this Gouldian position over against Conway Morris, by which it can be more expressed, I think, easily more expressed? Like, are you talking about God in some way as a presence of purposefulness in the universe, as a direction or something, or not at all? Is that kind of gone?
No, I look to recover and posit an altered conception. I don't go all the way with Conway Morris, so to speak. I don't go all the way with him, but I find his arguments to be persuasive. But again, I'm not
regarding Gould, right? So if you go with Gould, the radical kind of contingency of the evolutionary process that would never repeat, right? In a sense, I take that simply as this. So what in what sense would be a divine action be able to be differentiated from pure chaos or chaotic development?
Okay. Very interesting question. Well, I do think that God works in and through randomness in nature, in and through contingency or chance, as I refer to it, numerous places in the proposal here, which I'm glad that all of you have signed off on, or lessons rather, excuse me. But regardless, I would look to highlight that God nevertheless works through contingency to derive at his goals for creation.
So what are the goals? What are the goals if theoretically contingent and never repeat, as in Gould?
Well, I'm looking to hijack Gould's argument, and I don't go all the way with him either. But I think it's a proper balance between a convergence and then a contingency, as represented by Gould and Conway Morris collectively.
So if you differentiate radical contingency in Gould, for which I think you do not need to talk about God's action, or it would not make any difference whether you talk about it or not. Like, how do you differentiate it then? How do you differentiate some kind of purposefulness beyond the contingency of unrepeatable evolutionary processes?
Well, I follow Thomas J. Ord in so much as he contends that God's love is uncontrolling, and it's also purposeful, of course. Uncontrolling in the sense that it does not follow that because God shows love to creation or to individuals that he necessarily insists upon an outcome. Rather, God allows propensities within inherent matter, for example, or propensities within behavior and so forth like that to work themselves out in an uncontrolling way. So the idea there being that the uncontrolling love of God enjoys, exalts, and even pursues diversity and the contingentist nature of reality, in so much as he finds pleasure in a multitude or in a multiplicity, as you put it, in several of your texts.
So the purpose then is the enjoyment of diversity. Is
yes.
that the divine aim, or the action of divine aim? The aim of divine actions would be that.
Yes, in a sense, it would be directly applicable to the idea of diversity and so forth like that. I think I put it in here that it populates. I think I used the term population in the sense of filling out, in the sense of coming from a biological background. I'm working through this now, so please excuse me. But I of course, as you know, organisms all organisms have particular niches. Well, I contend that these niches do not pre-exist in a Conway Morris type sense, but rather that they're created in the development of the evolutionary process itself. And these niches, therefore, are I guess in a controlling, well, not controlling, but rather these niches are in some sense the purposes of God. I would say that then the organisms grow into those niches and fulfill God's purpose thereby. but the diversity and the multiplicity inherent within the process pleases God, in my contention. That's the theological spin I'm putting on gould. Right. I'm not sure if I adequately.
You and I have lots to talk about.
Okay.
We haven't actually gone this deeply into the theses and have many responses, but I'll hold mine for today because we'll have many hours before the four of us meet in the same room again to enjoy these possibilities. But Dr. Faber is bringing some broader guiding questions that I'm going to want you to actually write down and have in front of us at our meetings, so that it's a kind of question, whatever your concrete proposal is, that you'll need to be able to answer. And it has to do with the nature of your proposal, theological implications, and I think particularly, Roland, to make sure that the approach of Conway Morris, which you see as particularly profitable, is either carefully criticized or adapted and appropriated.
Well, it's not, you know, per se his position, but also the theological background, how to think, or philosophical background, how to think about the possibility space, for instance, and the limitations of that in relationship to a concrete universe, whether they are all equal, you know, or whether there is a kind of a selective process of combination possible to think about in a possibility space, or whether how the love of God is understood to be purposeful. That's another kind of more profound background. How it's differentiated, how it can be differentiated from either necessity or chaos, or just contingent development on no rules, basically, right? So is there a differentiation? I want to know more about that. I don't see that yet to happen. At least in a dissertation. I want to know that you go there in your dissertation to answer these questions, because otherwise I don't see how it is meaningful to talk about the action of God anyway, anywhere, if there's no difference between them. Well, I stop there. It's kind of enough. I mean, you see the area of the field where I'm kind of interested in to say more about. Yeah.
Very well. Just allow me to respond just a moment. Conway Morris, as I'm sure you know, is essentially Neoplatonic. And he thinks that the niches, so to speak, pre-exist the organisms, and the organisms grow into the niche. I take a functionalist route on that. So I take segments of Conway Morris's thought, and I'm looking to appropriate them in an altered form for my own usage. Right.
I will tell you what I see here is in the background. If you take a process model, it's kind of the fight between Whitehead and Hartshorne. Hartshorne thinking there are new eternal objects, and Whitehead doesn't think that. But then there might be a misunderstanding that there's a fixed definition of what the space of possibilities is, right? And then novelty excluded by the fact that we talk about a probability space, right, of niches, for instance. Is that really the case, that it's limited to, what does it mean there's novel niches to be created over against they are fixed in a Whiteheadian context over Hartsonian, whatever. The point being, if you want to allow for novelty, if you want to allow for a non-fixedness of the evolutionary development, how do you understand the purposefulness of any direction in it as being divine over against any kind of development? How do you differentiate that, right? It does look like you don't need to make a difference. And my question is, if you want to talk about the action of God, where is the difference, right? How can I see a purposefulness? It's not enough to say for me God works through indeterminacy or indeterminateness, because maybe not. And what about all the orders in the world? Are they just meaningless or whatever, right? So how are they connected? Openness, novelty to order. What about the biblical symbol of wisdom to be part of it that Whitehead takes up, for instance? Wisdom is not just pure contingency on nothing, but it has a certain direction, even if it's an open one, if it allows novelty. Or Whitehead's sentence, like, if you want to have a process context for art, right? That the world is not a chaos because of God's immanence aesthetically in the world, right? This is something you want to say, I see that, but I need to see how that works through the different levels of your dissertation. And again, it doesn't hinder I don't need to know everything for your final proposal yet. I just want to know that you will ask these kinds of questions.
So, Roland, if I put that in the simplest terms, like the one main takeaway, it would be, tell me if this is accurate. Bradford, it's fine that you talk about possibility spaces, but what I really need to know are what are God's criteria if there is some lure of God in this, what are the things that God is valuing? Why do you say that? And what does it mean for your position? Does God want order, creativity, agency? Is there a prefixed heavenly outcome? Like, be much more clear, Bradford, about what, if God is trying to bring something about, before you tell me how God is doing this, tell me what is it that God is aiming for?
No, both of that, right? How? Also, that's kind of part of his whole question, right? How is that working? Since he uses all of these materials to make a case for it, I would say it maybe slightly differently and say, like, how do you define the difference given your radical contingency thesis of God? What's the difference between God's? How can you differentiate God's action or identify God's action in such a world from a world in which we don't need to talk about God and the same thing will happen?
Got it.
In a very real sense, I think that we can only identify God's action in retrospect, not in prospect.
Yeah, I don't mean like a specific action. I mean that there is an activity of God. How would you differentiate that from the fact that you could say, well, it's just a contingent development?
Okay.
I don't need, why would I talk about, like, what is there any kind of purposefulness that goes beyond saying that? So therefore a difference between a pure, let's say, chaotically oriented contingency towards a somehow divine action, purposeful, love-oriented development.
So is the question clear?
Yes,
Don't
the question
answer,
is clear.
because actually the question is very complex and there are levels and levels of it. But that's what we need to hold most in mind, so that the proposal that comes forward to the committee addresses that question in a clear way.
Okay.
It's also a potential objection, is how I hear it also, Roland. Because in a universe of radical contingency where bloody much anything can happen, right? Why do you need a God idea at all?
That's exactly. And that was Gould's statement, right? I mean, Gould.
Of course.
So.
Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. Because that's a demand for the theological side that's serious. It will cause you to engage in a deep way with these and other authors to address it. So that it's always good if I can represent your voice and your questions in the discussions, there'll be a better proposal. So that's why I wanted to intervene with you.
Perfect.
Thank you, Roland. That's really helpful.
Thank you.
Professor Baum.
I continue exactly here. So I have a few questions. I think your overall project is clear. I think very clear what you want to do. My questions are more about why you want to do it and how you want to do it. So you define your problem as developing a plausible hypothesis of divine action involving well-related modern theology. Now, there are two problems here, of course, understanding what you are trying to do, but there is also a question about why you think that is a helpful or important question. And I don't really see anything about this. And that is, I think, something you have to get clear about, or at least in your own mind. Why do you think that is important to address that problem? And there's a larger question behind it, which is linking up to some extent what we've just been discussing. What do you think does theology bring beyond a scientific explanation of an evolving world? Why do we need theology in that context at all? Is any needed from the kind of problems we are discussing? Or is it a very different question, that theology is your starting point and you want somehow find a way of relating what's going on in that area to what's going on in some other area? I'm not quite clear where exactly your emphasis is. So this, I think you should at least indicate in your proposal why you think that is a question to ask, and from which perspective, from the theology or the science perspective. If you do it from the science perspective, you are immediately in questions like one, why at all? What do you need God for in order to explain? If you do it from the theology perspective, I think you should say a little bit more about what you think theology brings to the table beyond what's on the table from the side of stuff.
Very good point there. Very good point. Do you want me to respond to that?
So Dr. Delfer decide where it's something he just wants us to write down the question and work on it, and where he may need to know something from you now in order to ask or make other questions or make other statements. So that'll be his decision.
So I have 2 or 3 more specific questions, because that's the kind of a background thing. If you could spend a whole dissertation writing on this, but that's not what I want. I simply want you to be clear about what you're doing. Now, the formulation of your problem, you use divine action language throughout the paper, but you very quickly, even here, switch to another type of language, talking about the divine involvement in the world. And I'm not quite sure how exactly involvement language and action language, whether they are simply interchangeable. That seems to be the case here. Yes. So my question here is, why do you use action language and not, for example, activity language? And if you use action language, what exactly do you mean by involvement?
Respond, Harold. I was looking to develop my own unique perspective here, and I liked the sound of involvement because it's generic, it's ambiguous, and it doesn't specify a causal joint. Whenever we're talking about divine action on a large scale, invariably the problem that we have is identifying a causal joint, and by removing that language, I may not be as precise as I should be, but I was trying to use that almost as a synonym, as you point out there. Divine involvement being an ambiguous way to speak about God's activity in the world. And the divine action part was merely me to elucidate more fully what I meant by that. But again, the idea behind using the divine involvement is because it's ambiguous and it doesn't specify a causal joint.
Yeah, I mean, this causal joint problem is one problem, but if you use action language, you obviously mark off one action from other action, one type of action from other types of action. And that you don't even touch on this problem, but I think you can be more specific with respect to divine action. Activity would be very different here if you use divine activity. But that is not, there's no plurality of divine activities in a certain way. So I think you have to clarify something along these lines here.
So you're saying, and since it's a semantic range among 3, actions are specific and sequential.
There's actions and other actions.
But you might speak of somebody's activity over the course of his entire life without referring to any particular action.
Kant was very specific. He said, no, it's only one activity. Well, it's only one divine activity.
Yeah.
No actions. Action talk is sort of anthropomorphic in a certain way.
And then,
we must have.
And then involvement is almost interest or something. So you're giving them a range.
So,
I understand.
That is the first. But then there's another sort of mixing of discourses, as I would perhaps call it. You say involvement in the world. And then a few lines further down, you talk about God's goals for creation. Now, is world and creation talk the same type of thing? Now, how do you relate the theological discourse here to the obviously non-theological discourse? And where exactly do you think they are related? Or how do you think they are related?
I think that God is creator, but I'm hesitant to always employ the creation language because it's loaded. It's a lot of baggage and so forth. But I agree that I was not as precise as I should have been in calling it one thing throughout. Yeah. So that's a very good criticism. It is, yes. I'm right. I can see how that's conceptually confusing there.
I mean, especially when you talk about goals of God. I mean, I think you can make sense of goals of creation. I'm not so sure of when you talk about goals of the world. At least there is something you need to explain this in more detail than simply use it interchangeably. Well, this brings me to my third area, which is, okay, it's the same question over and over again. When you talk about evolution on the one hand and creation on the other hand, sometimes it looks as if they are interchangeable. Sometimes it looks as, creation talk brings something to evolution talk that goes beyond. And I'm not quite sure how you exactly see this. If you construe the situation from the creation point of view, divine involvement is already sort of goal-oriented in a certain way, because that seems to be the idea of creation here. If you start from the evolution point of view, it's not at all clear that it's goal-oriented in any sense. So I think the choice of language here may cover up a problem that you have to actually make explicit, namely how to move from the one discourse into the other, or how to mix these discourses. And this goes even further, my last point here. Sometimes towards the end of your proposal, you say it's not about evolution and creation, it's more about comparing two worldviews. Now, here we are in a different area again. A worldview is obviously not merely a scientific theory, much more in a sense. So comparing worldviews, is that your interest in the paper, or is it trying to build a kind of a coherent picture of a theological understanding of creation that works through contemporary theories of evolution?
I'm fulfilling a requirement for the dissertation in order to get a degree in comparative theology. You've got to do some sort of comparative work. So, in consultation with Phil, he and I discussed this idea that I included there, and I must admit it's probably a little half-baked, right? But no, on my part, not yours. On my part.
I've never heard a Dr. Kennedy say that.
No, that's my part, not you. Right? No, but I am trying to fulfill a requirement to have a comparative, some sort of a comparison in the paper itself. And he and I thought together, and I didn't develop as well as I should have probably, but that we could compare worldviews instead of religions and or denominations and so forth. Compare the worldviews. But I'm not beholden to that. But I think that the School of Divinity is, if I'm not mistaken. So that's a very interesting point that I've got to make. And I'd like to go back here quickly to Dr. Faber, just because you also indicated a question regarding your presence in the dissertation. I thought that I should proverbially give you a carrot, if you understand what I mean by that, in order to persuade you to work on my committee. So I wanted therefore to include you and sort of wave it in front of you and maybe get you to bite, so to speak, right? But that's not as well thought out either, frankly, and that's why you only see in the proposal a comparison between Thomas J. Ward and Roland Faber, and then regarding RE, right? That's because I did not have it that well thought out at the time. But I'm trying to, like I said, provoke you into being on my committee because I want your perspective to a great degree.
So, Robert, since you brought it up, can we talk to the two gentlemen one by one and hear their responses? So, Roland, you might say, God forbid, never, or you might say, if you include my work, you need to explain why it's an important dialogue partner with ORG. Can you comment on your feelings and thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I get the comparative part. I get less that I should be attracted more to be in a committee when you do this. But I understand the comparative part. I'm not against it. I just wanted to see. I mean, I wanna at a certain point know what the comparison is about, right? What exactly you're gaining by doing so. And it might be meaningful and it might not be meaningful. I don't know yet, right? So I'm not against it, but that's okay with me as long as you can explain that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, sir. Right.
So I don't need to explain why it's me that's there. That's okay. You can just compare two different ones. But if you take me, then what is it you're comparing, and what is the outcome of that comparison, basically? And can I live with that, basically, in your interpretation of my own work is the question.
So I guess Bradford's trying to find out if you're less likely to be a happy committee member if you don't get mentioned, or
No, it doesn't. No, it's just let him go ahead. That's fine.
Okay.
That's fine.
You see the reason why, in this case, a scientific theory and a theological theory would be, but that is, as I know you work very well, highly problematic for you. Is there a way we can walk around this? Do you want to spend some time justifying it? let's try to surface
It's a
that.
very simple point I'm trying to. Comparing is a three-term relation. You compare something to something else with respect to something. You have to have a point of view for comparing. Now, I see you comparing very different things. And that's why I'm asking, for example, when you compare worldviews, you have to make a case, I think, for looking at evolutionary biology, as which you use here, as a worldview. And how does it differ from having an evolutionary biology in the sense of trying to explain certain phenomena in history and of the world in a certain way? That is not a worldview yet. That is an attempt to explain a set of phenomena by reference to a certain mechanism that explains them. The same with respect to divine action. So if that is what you compare, I think you have to make a case for that these are worldviews, first sense. And secondly, what is the point of reference with respect to which you want to compare them? That tells me more about your interest in comparing. And I want to push you to be more explicit about what it is you want to find out here. But this is a very different problem from comparing evolution and creation with respect to God. And so I got clear about what kind of problem you want to address. You may do it in different, different comparisons in different parts of the dissertation. But you should be clear about what you actually do.
So, of the two issues you just mentioned regarding worldviews, with regard to what are you comparing them is a very fruitful question for the proposal, because answering that will help you get clear on your project. The first part of the question, I just want to make sure that it's going to be okay, because there are strong arguments, you've made many of them in print, for not treating religion as a worldview. There's another set of arguments about science and worldviews, but set those aside. We can handle those. Is it problematic for him to do that, narrowing a religion down to a worldview of a certain relationship of God and world?
No, I think that is, you can do it. And there are religions that do more like worldviews and others that don't, because they are kind of a practice which is very difficult to identify as a particular worldview. And you need a notion of a worldview in order to, and you only use the term, but you don't tell me what you mean.
Yeah, because we could say ontology, we could say metaphysics.
Right. Yeah,
people use that as a sort of fluffy.
That's right, but I want you to be precise here so that you don't get sidetracked on something, or doing something which you think you're discussing, but in fact you're mixing categories in that.
If he's sufficiently precise, is it acceptable to you as a committee member that he's treating theology as one bit?
Of course, it is.
And
yeah. I mean,
a particular theory of science as
okay,
another,
right,
with regard to some third point type of comparison?
Exactly.
That's okay with you.
Yeah, but if you construe it as a worldview, for example, you may find that the distinction between evolutionary biology and a religious worldview isn't there. There's much of a distinction. Maybe one is the same in a certain respect. So it just depends on how you use the category of worldview. In Sweden, they've used the idea of worldview to replace dogmatics, basically. So we have worldviews, we have worldview studies, etc. And this is the kind of thing I'm trying to do.
They use it.
So that was only one point. I think the more basic point is be clear about what you're comparing and in which regard.
But the last basic point just makes me a little bit nervous, because worlds are separated by these views of religion and what theology can do. We could probably cheat on the so-called comparative requirement in the CST program and have him let him avoid that worldview concept altogether if you think it might be intrinsically unsettling to his project.
I don't think it is. It depends on, if you spend more time on the worldview comparison, you're doing something different from asking a question about how a certain view of evolution allows you to think in terms of a certain understanding of divine action or activity. That is simply a much more specific question than the worldview question. And it depends on what you think the focus of your dissertation should be. Do you want to have this more general discussion, or do you want to focus on this more specific set of problems, which is complex enough?
I see the dangers that Professor Belford is pointing out very, very clearly, and how it could, I think unsettle is the right verb, your overall project. And I think I'd be inclined, because no one's really going to look over our shoulder. The dean's not going to say, does it fulfill all the requirements of the comparativist PhD? I'd rather have him stay on safe ground and more straightforward comparisons with where he states the third, as you always put it, more carefully, rather than put him into an a conceptual framework that's going to raise huge problems for the core things he wants to get done. So I think we may back down on that comparison because I see the sort of, well, what do you see, landmines that he could step on if he's trying to force everything into the two worldviews framework, which is in the language of the comparative, of most comparative PhDs. We'll do a more Wittgensteinian comparative in this case.
Well, I mean, there are
A and B compared with regard to C, period. And don't require to put in some 19th century framework about Anschauung. Okay, that's actually very important for the proposal, I think, for a reason I can show you later. Back to you,
No, these were the points I think you have to sort of reflect on the language you use, you know, whether it's kind of prelipsis or syllabuscal language or why you ask yourself why you use the one in one case, another in another case.
Yeah, that's the bigger point. Okay. I'm clear, and I think I can help interpret those as we move forward. We're out of time. Let's take just a second to find out what we can about your other plans, since your plans for your particular calls do have to be approved by the whole committee. That's not made by the advisor alone. They usually, they won't be deeply involved, but if something's wrong, they'll help us see it. Okay, something is not good for your overarching preparation. So tell us roughly what's your target for taking your written qualifying exams and then convening the four of us for the oral part.
I'm shooting, and I think I told Dr. Faber this yesterday or 2 days ago in class. I mentioned it. I'm taking an extra course this summer online so as to reduce my load next spring to 2 classes, with the intention being that next spring I take a third class, so to speak, or take the time of the third class and work toward my comprehensive exams, which y'all will hammer out for me, you know, what have you. So I'm looking to go ahead and get on top of that as soon as possible and go ahead and start reading and digesting things as soon as I can, right? But so I'm looking to finish up with my proposal, of course, and submit it, and I'm looking to finish up with my comprehensive exams most likely next spring. That's what.
Thank you.
Great. So that would mean that the four of us would meet in a room or by Zoom for 2 hours in late April or maybe early May 2020 to do that. And you and I can talk about the details. Basically, okay as a goal?
Right.
Goal? Yeah. And then have you asked anyone, do we have a fully agreed upon list of the four calls you do? Then let's not touch on that today. And when that's decided and he's ready to ask people, we'll make sure there's a clear communication. If there's something that doesn't look right in those plans, just let us know. Okay. I think that completes it. Anything else, Roland?
So if you want to do a call with me, please let's do everything in the fall. I want to do as least as possible in the spring, since it's my sabbatical.
Makes sense perfectly to me. It does.
Okay.
Great. Anything else? No. Thank you. Congratulations. I don't know if my two colleagues know how many hours went into this, how many drafts we've gone through, how hard you worked, and I want to express my respect for the seriousness that you approach this with. You guys may well know that Bradford was well into a PhD program at another institution, had actually passed qual, I think, and now is doing this over again. So if it seems like he knows the texts and is well read, he actually is. So high compliments to you. I think there's excitement on what you want, and I have felt all the questions were friendly questions aimed at helping you do your work better.
And I'm a better man for it, and I appreciate your perspective, Dr. Faber, as well as you, Dr. Alfred.
Well said. Well said. Roland, thanks for joining us.
Okay.
Bye. Goodbye.
Bye, Ron.
Goodbye.
Thanks all. And we're going to take a breath, and then we have a group of people out there. I'm going to shake your hand because we're heading right into this exam.
Thank you.
And congratulations. We weren't sure that they let you through, and I think they let you through with flying colors. I want you to take. Hey, greetings. I want you to take some time to turn it off. To go back to the recording
and write out those questions. I don't care if it takes you 2 full weeks. It doesn't have to be verbatim about little points, but when somebody formulates a question so nicely, like Dr. Dalton, then that you have those in that file, the Word file that you're going to create would be fantastic.
Sure.
I think it'll give a lot of clarity for us. Whenever you bring a new proposal, I'll have that printout in my hand. I'll say, does it answer Adolfo's questions? You'll say, yeah, I did it right here. Did you answer that question? Yeah, I did it right here.
So just so I'm clear, we're banishing compared to Paul.
We're not going to use the worldview concept for it, but we're going to use his framework. So when you're comparing a theory of evolution and a theory of creation, he's going to say with regard to what? And that means it'll be, if I have to defend it to the dean or faculty, I think I can do it, but it'll be more vicusterious. Whereas before we shoved it into this particular straitjacket, worldview A versus worldview B, and you would know that could be misleading to your project with the computer straitjacket.
I'll reflect on.
But do take your time in getting the key from this meeting onto paper, into a file. I will say, we recorded it on Zoom, and so as soon as I get that, let's actually go out and talk to.
I see, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
That's not,
There's always something going on.
that's fine, you know,
Yeah.
depends on, you know, all the counts of skills.
Right.
That's all I'm putting up to you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel bad, I'm always telling you no, I'd love to be more involved.